The human ship had broken apart like glass in the sky. Pieces burned across the endless white, vanishing into snow and silence. When he crawled out from the wreckage, the air bit into his lungs, colder than any winter he had known on Earth. The planet was not just cold, it was cruel. The sky was gray, the ground an ocean of snow, and the wind screamed like a beast that never tired. He wrapped himself in the torn fabric of his seat cover, stumbling through the snow with shaking legs. Each breath felt heavy, and the emptiness around him pressed down harder than the cold. Alone, he thought. Alone on a dead world. That night, when the darkness fell, the cold became worse than pain. He remembered the emergency lighter in his pocket. With trembling hands, he struck it again and again until the smallest spark caught on a piece of broken insulation. A weak flame grew, fighting the wind, fragile but alive. He cupped it with his hands, whispering to it as if it were a living friend. That little fire was the only thing standing between him and death. On the second night, while searching for something to burn, he found them. At first, he thought they were statues buried in the snow. Two small shapes huddled together, near a rock, still and silent. When he came closer, they moved. Not statues, living beings. Two girls, or at least two creatures shaped like girls. Their skin shimmered faintly, painted with glowing patterns like stars across dark velvet. Their hair was long and silver, tangled from the storm. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the weak firelight from the torch in his hand. They looked at him the way lost animals do, afraid but too tired to run. The human froze. He was barely keeping himself alive. He had nothing to give. Yet as he watched them, shivering, their fragile bodies pressed together, something inside him ached. He remembered his own fear when the night fell, the way the cold crept into his bones. If he walked away, they would not last the night. Slowly he crouched and struck his lighter again. The flame caught on a bundle of dry fibers he had collected. He built a small fire right there in the snow, the light flickering across their glowing faces. Then he stepped back, showing them with his hands. Warmth. For a long moment they did not move. They only watched him, whispering to each other in a soft, musical tongue he could not understand. But the fire was irresistible. Little by little, they crawled closer. One reached out a thin hand toward the flames, pulling it back quickly as if she thought it might bite her. Then she tried again, fingers trembling until the warmth touched her skin. The human sat silently, letting them come closer. He shared his fire without words. The girls huddled near the flames, their silver hair catching the light, their eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. They were not smiling, not yet, but the stiffness in their bodies began to ease. The younger, one leaned her head against the older's shoulder, and for the first time that night their shaking slowed. The human sat across from them, his hands stretched toward the fire as well. For a while none of them moved, none of them spoke. But there was something in the silence, something gentle. Three souls gathered around one fragile flame, all clinging to life, all bound by the same need for warmth. When the wind howled again, the sisters flinched and pressed closer together. The human threw more scraps onto the fire, determined not to let it die. He felt their eyes on him, watching, cautious but no longer filled with pure terror. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know what world he had crashed on. But in that frozen place something had begun. That night they did not freeze alone. The fire burned low in the snow, but its light was enough to push away the darkness. The human sat with tired eyes, watching the two alien sisters curled close to each other. Their glowing markings pulsed softly, like faint stars painted on their skin. He wondered if those lights meant warmth, or life, or something sacred. He didn't know. He only knew they were alive, and that mattered. When morning came, the storm had not eased. The sky was still heavy and gray. The human stretched his aching limbs and tried to rise, but the hunger in his belly bent him back down. He had eaten almost nothing since the crash. His hands shook as he searched the snow for anything that could be food. The sisters watched him with wide eyes, whispering softly in their strange tongue. He couldn't understand their words, but he could feel their worry. They were weak too, their movements slow, their faces pale. After hours of wandering, he found frozen roots buried beneath the snow and berries hidden under a patch of ice. They tasted bitter, but they were food. He brought them back and placed them in the sisters' hands. He showed them how to eat, taking a small bite first. They looked at each other, hesitated, then copied him. Their thin lips curved in surprise at the strange taste, and for the first time a sound escaped their throats, a soft laugh. It was small, broken, but real. The sound made the human's chest feel warm, warmer than the fire itself. That night he gave them most of the food. He ate less, pushing the berries toward them when they tried to return them. He pointed at their thin arms, then at his own chest, showing them, "You need this more than I do." The older sister's eyes softened. She looked at him for a long time, then reached into a small pouch tied around her waist. From it, she pulled a glowing crystal no bigger than a fist. She held it carefully as if it was the most precious thing she owned, and then offered it to him. The human hesitated. He pointed to her, shaking his head, trying to give it back. But she pushed it toward him firmly, her silver eyes steady. He finally accepted it. The crystal pulsed in his hand, humming with a low vibration. It was warm. Truly warm, not like the fire that faded quickly, but like something alive. He pressed it to his chest and felt the heat seep through his frozen skin. He whispered, "Thank you," even though he knew they didn't understand. From that night, their bond began to grow. The sisters inched closer to him by the fire. At first, they kept a little space between them, their eyes still cautious. But as the days passed, the distance shrank. Sometimes their shoulders brushed his, and they did not pull away. Sometimes their heads rested lightly against his arm when sleep took them. The human started to give them names in his mind. The older one, who was calm and steady, he called Light, because of the way her crystal glowed in the dark. The younger one, playful despite her fear, he called Echo because of the way her laughter repeated in his head long after it faded. He knew they could not understand these names, but when he spoke them softly, the sisters always looked up. Their glowing eyes softened as if they understood his meaning even without words. In the nights that followed, when the fire crackled low, he caught them watching him. Not with fear anymore, but with curiosity. Their silver hair shone in the flames. Their markings flickered like fireflies. They whispered to each other, sometimes pointing at him, sometimes smiling shyly when he noticed. It struck him then. He was no longer completely alone. The planet was still cruel. The cold still tried to steal their lives every night. But there, around the fragile fire, 3 strangers had found something precious: trust. And in a world of endless snow, trust was warmer than fire. The fire had become their heart. Every night, the human gathered what little wood he could find, and every night, the sisters curled close to its warmth, their glowing skin reflecting the orange flames. For a while, the world outside their circle of light felt distant, almost forgotten. But the frozen planet was never safe. One night, when the wind was quiet, the human noticed something different. The silence was heavy, almost watchful. His skin prickled. He had lived long enough to know that silence was sometimes more dangerous than noise. He rose to his feet, gripping the sharpened piece of metal he had shaped into a crude blade. His eyes scanned the shadows beyond the fire. The sisters noticed his tension and clutched each other tightly, their glowing patterns flickering faster like frightened heartbeats. Then he saw them. Yellow eyes in the dark. Dozens of them. Low to the ground, circling silently. The beasts had been watching, waiting for the moment when the fire would shrink. The first growl shattered the silence. It was deep, hungry, full of teeth. The sisters gasped and pressed closer to the human. He could feel their trembling, their small hands clutching his arm. He wanted to comfort them, to tell them they would be safe, but he had no words they could understand. He only had one promise to give: his stance between them and the dark. The first beast lunged into the light. Its body was long, its limbs bent wrong, its skin stretched tight over bone. Its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged teeth meant to break flesh and bone alike. The human raised his blade. The clash was fast and brutal. The beast slammed into him, claws raking his arm. Pain burned through him, but he drove the metal shard into its throat. Hot blood sprayed against the snow, black in the firelight. The creature collapsed, writhing before going still. The others growled louder now, circling faster. The sisters cried out, their voices sharp and strange but full of fear. The human staggered back toward the fire, his chest heaving. More beasts came. He fought them one by one, swinging the blade with all the strength he had left. He was no soldier, no warrior, only a man who refused to fall. Each strike was clumsy but desperate, fueled by something stronger than skill. Will. He felt claws tear across his back. He felt teeth sink into his shoulder. He screamed but did not fall. He fought, always keeping himself between the fire and the sisters. When the last beast fell, the snow around the fire was stained black. The human dropped to his knees, blood dripping from his arms, his breath coming in broken gasps. His vision blurred. The fire flickered weakly, struggling to survive. The sisters rushed to him, their glowing hands pressed against his wounds, their eyes wide and wet with something he had never seen before, tears. The younger one, Echo, sobbed strange words, her voice trembling like a child's. The older, Light, held her hands over his chest. Then it happened. Their markings glowed brighter, brighter than he had ever seen. The light spread from their bodies into his. He felt warmth surge through his wounds, felt pain fade as if washed away by gentle fire. The torn flesh sealed, the bleeding slowed. His chest rose and fell easier. He stared at them, stunned. He did not understand what they had done, only that they had given him something of themselves. Their light, their life. When the glow faded, the sisters collapsed against him, exhausted, but alive. They leaned into his chest, breathing weakly, their small bodies trembling with both fear and relief. The human wrapped his arms around them, ignoring his own weakness. He pulled them close, whispering words they could not understand but surely could feel. "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe." The beasts lay dead in the snow, but the sisters did not look at them. They only clung to the human, the one who had stood between them and death, the one who had fought until his body nearly broke. That night, something changed. They no longer saw him as just a stranger who shared fire. He was their shield, their protector, their human. And in their glowing eyes he saw something that made his chest ache. The days after the attack passed slowly, each one marked by struggle, each one held together by the fire. The beast did not return, but their memory stayed in. The human's body, the sting of wounds, the taste of blood, the echo of growls in the night. Still, he lived. Still, the sisters lived. Together, they began to move like one family. The human would rise each morning and search for wood, dragging back frozen branches heavy with ice. The sisters would follow him, their glowing markings, bright against the snow, their small hands carrying roots, berries, or scraps of anything that could burn. They worked in silence most of the time, but silence no longer felt heavy. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who did not need words to understand each other. The sisters had grown bolder. They no longer sat far from him when night fell. Instead, they leaned against him, their silver hair brushing his shoulder. Sometimes, the younger one, Echo, would tug at his sleeve with playful energy, pointing at strange shapes in the snow, laughing in her soft musical way. Other times, Light, calm and watchful, would press her crystal into his hand whenever his shivers grew too strong. The fire was no longer only wood and spark. It had become something more. It was the center of their bond. Around it, they shared food. Around it, they shared warmth. Around it, they shared pieces of themselves. One evening, after a long day of gathering, The human sat staring into the flames. His body ached. His hunger gnawed at him, but his heart felt strangely full. He looked at the two sisters curled against his side, their glowing patterns flickering with the rhythm of their breath. He wondered who they were before this. Were they daughters of someone waiting for them? Were they wanderers like him, lost in the storm? Or had this cruel world always been their prison? He would never know their words, but he knew their eyes. And their eyes told him everything. They trusted him. Later that night, the sisters began to sing. The sound was soft at first, a hum carried on the cold wind. Then it grew, weaving through the fire's crackle. It was not like human music. It was higher, lighter, full of echoes and vibrations that touched the heart before the ears. Their voices blended like two rivers flowing into one. The human closed his eyes. The song wrapped around him like a blanket. For a moment, he forgot the storm, the hunger, the beasts. He only felt the warmth of the fire, the glow of their light, and the strange comfort of belonging. When their song ended, Echo giggled shyly, hiding her face against Light's shoulder. Light only smiled faintly, her silver eyes glancing at the human as if to ask if he understood. He did. Maybe not the words, but the meaning. In return, he reached for a small stick and drew shapes in the snow. A circle, 3 dots inside it, then flames rising from the center. He pointed to himself, to them, to the fire, his way of saying, "We are one." The sisters studied his drawing, then smiled. Their glowing hands traced the shape with him, pressing, their palms against his as if sealing a promise. That night they leaned on him without fear. He felt their heads resting against his chest, heard their breathing steady, and for the first time since the crash, he did not feel like a man lost, on a dead world. He felt like someone needed, someone chosen. The planet outside was still frozen, still cruel, but inside their small circle of fire, something new had taken root. Not just survival, not just trust. It was warmth that went deeper than the skin. It was fire of the heart. The storms eased for a time, and the days grew brighter, though the cold never left. The human had grown used to the rhythm of survival, gathering wood, finding food, protecting the sisters. His body was thinner, his clothes torn, but his heart felt heavier with something more than survival. It was a bond, a family he had not expected. One morning, while searching farther than usual for wood, he saw it. Far on the horizon, through the curtain of snow, a light pulsed. Bright, steady, artificial. His heart stopped. A rescue beacon. For a long moment he stood frozen, the wind biting at his face. That beacon meant hope. That beacon meant his people had not forgotten him. If he followed it, if he made it there, he could leave this frozen world behind. He could go home. But then another thought struck him. Home. What was home now? His eyes turned back toward the small shelter where the fire burned and where 2 glowing sisters waited for him. He pictured their faces when he returned each evening, the way Echo always rushed forward with excitement, the way Light's calm eyes softened at the sight of him. Would he walk away from that? He gathered the wood and returned slowly. When the sisters saw him, they ran to him smiling. Echo tugged on his arm to show him the handful of roots she had dug up. Light pressed her crystal into his palm again as if reminding him, "You are not alone." The human sat by the fire that night, staring into the flames. He could not bring himself to tell them, even if they could not understand. He only watched them as they leaned close to him, their silver hair glowing softly in the firelight. His chest ached with the weight of his choice. Days passed. Each time he went out, the beacon pulled at his mind. It was not far. He could reach it. He could be warm again, full again, safe again. But every time, he returned to the sisters. One evening, he could not hide his conflict anymore. He sat across from them, the fire crackling between them. With a piece of charcoal he drew in the snow, a ship, then an arrow pointing upward. He pressed his hand to his chest, then pointed to the sky. The sisters tilted their heads, their silver eyes full of confusion. Echo frowned and shook her head, clutching his arm. Light's eyes grew wide, her glowing hands trembling as she reached for him. He saw fear there. Not fear of the beasts, not fear of the cold, fear of him leaving. He dropped the charcoal. His throat tightened. He had thought the choice would be simple, life or death, hope or despair. But now it was not about him alone. If he left, what would happen to them? They were fragile yet brave, gentle yet unprotected. Without him, would they survive? That night, he did not sleep. The fire burned low, the sisters asleep on either side of him, their heads resting against his shoulders. He stared into the flames, listening to their quiet breaths, feeling their warmth. He realized then that he was no longer the same man who had crashed on this world. He had come as a survivor. Now, he was more. He was their shield, their family. The beacon still called, to him, but it no longer felt like hope, it felt like a question with only one answer. When the dawn came, the human pressed his hand to the sister's shoulders gently as if making a silent promise. He whispered, "I'm not leaving you." They stirred, eyes opening slowly, and though they could not understand his words, they understood his heart. Their hands reached for his, holding tight, their glowing skin flickering with quiet relief. He had chosen. The world outside was still frozen, still cruel, but around their fire, warmth lived. He would not trade that for any ship, any sky, any home. His home was here now, with them. Trust so deep it felt like love. The decision was made in his heart, though the weight of it still pressed heavy on him. Each time he thought of the beacon, his chest tightened, but each time he looked at the sisters, the weight lifted. Their faces, their laughter, their trust. That was what mattered now. One evening, as the fire burned bright and the sky above shimmered with strange pale lights, the sisters acted differently. They sat across from him, whispering softly to each other, their glowing markings brighter than usual. Their silver hair swayed in the cold wind, and their eyes kept turning toward him with a kind of nervousness. The human felt it. Something was coming. Light, the older sister, reached into her pouch and pulled out the crystal she had once given him. She held it close to her chest, her eyes locked on his. Slowly she placed it in his hands again. The warmth pulsed stronger this time, as if alive, as if responding to her will. Echo, the younger one, leaned forward with trembling hands. She held a smaller crystal, her own, and placed it beside her sister's in his palms. Two lights, pulsing, glowing, beating like hearts. The human's breath caught. He looked from the crystals to their faces, confused but touched. They did not speak in words he could understand. Instead, they pressed their hands over his, closing his fingers around the crystals. Their glowing markings flared, wrapping the three of them in a soft light. Then it happened. The warmth from the crystals spread through him, not only into his skin but into his chest, his veins, his very heart. He gasped as it filled him, not with fire but with something gentler, deeper, the cold that had lived inside him since the crash melted away. He felt steady, whole, as if he had been broken for years without knowing it and was only now being mended. He looked at them, his eyes wide, but they only smiled softly through their tears. They pressed closer, their foreheads touching his. Their glowing hands rested on his shoulders, their voices humming in a melody so soft it felt like a prayer. Through their gestures, through the light, he understood. It was a binding, a promise, a claiming. They were giving him a place in their lives, not just as a protector or a stranger, but as family. He was no longer outside their circle. He was inside, bound by their light, chosen by their hearts. His own eyes stung. He closed them and let the warmth wash over him. He had no words to answer them, no ritual to give back. All he could do was hold them close, his arms wrapping around both sisters, his forehead pressing against theirs. For a long time, the three of them sat like that, wrapped in glow and silence, fire and snow. When the light finally faded, the sisters collapsed gently against him, exhausted but peaceful. Their breathing slowed as they drifted into sleep, their small bodies leaning into his chest. The crystals in his hands pulsed faintly, like two small hearts beating with his own. The human stared into the fire, feeling its warmth, feeling theirs. He realized then that he was not only surviving anymore. He was not only protecting. He belonged. The beacon still pulsed far away, calling him to another life. But in his hands, he held something brighter than any machine, any rescue, any hope. Of return, he held love. Not the love of romance, not the love of blood, but the love of souls that had chosen each other against the darkness of the world. He whispered, voice rough but steady, "I'm yours, always." The sisters stirred in their sleep, their glowing markings flickering faintly as if they had heard, as if they had understood. That night the fire burned stronger than ever, and in his heart a new fire was lit, one that would never die. The days stretched on. The human no longer counted them. Each sunrise felt the same, white snow, gray skies, endless cold. But inside their small circle of fire, life had warmth. The sisters leaned on him at night, their glowing patterns flickering gently like living embers. The crystals they had given him still pulsed against his chest, a steady reminder of their bond. Then, one morning, the silence broke. Far in the distance, across the frozen plain, a sound rose, a deep hum, heavy and familiar. The human's breath caught. He knew that sound. Ships. He ran to the edge of the ridge, his boots crunching through snow, and there it was. A rescue craft, breaking through the clouds, its engines glowing, its beacon flashing bright. His people. His chance to leave. For a long time he stood there staring. His chest tightened with hope and fear all at once. Home was calling. Safety was calling. Warm food, soft beds, voices he understood. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. The sisters. Echo grabbed his sleeve, tugging it like a frightened child. Her silver eyes were wide, shimmering with tears. Light stood beside her, calm as always, but her glowing hands trembled as they reached for his arm. They had seen the ship, too, and they understood what it meant. The human turned to them, his heart breaking. How could he explain? How could he tell them that for the first time in months he could live without fear of hunger, without the cold tearing his skin, without beasts in the night? But then he looked into their faces, Echo's desperate grip, Light's steady, pleading gaze. Their bond was not made of words. It was made of fire shared in the dark, blood spilled in the snow, trust built when death was near. He understood them without a single word. If he left, they would lose not just a protector. They would lose family. And he would lose the fire that had saved his soul. The ship's signal grew louder. A voice crackled faintly in the frozen air. "Survivor, we've found you. Hold your position." The human's chest ached. He looked at the sky, then at the sisters. His hand shook as he reached down, placing one hand on Echo's shoulder and the other on Light's. He pressed them close, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I can't leave you. I won't." They didn't understand the words, but they understood the choice. Echo buried her face against his chest, sobbing softly. Light's silver eyes shone, and for the first time a single tear rolled down her cheek. Their glowing markings pulsed brighter, wrapping around all three of them in gentle light. The ship circled above, its engines roaring, searching. But the human did not signal. He did not wave. He only held the sisters tighter, letting the ship pass over and vanish back into the clouds. The sound faded. Silence returned. And with it, peace. The human sat by the fire that night, with the sisters pressed close to him. The world outside was still cruel, still frozen, but his heart, no longer, felt the weight of choice. He had chosen already. He looked at their glowing faces, their silver hair catching the firelight, their eyes filled with trust that would never fade. He smiled, a tired but honest smile. "This is home," he whispered. The fire crackled, steady and strong. The crystals pulsed against his chest, beating in rhythm with his heart. The sisters leaned into him, their small hands holding his as if afraid to let go. And so, on a world where nothing should have survived, 3 souls endured. Not because of strength, not because of chance, but because one human had shared his fire and 2 alien sisters had refused to leave his side. The storms would return, the beasts would come again, the cold would never rest. But neither would their bond. It was not just fire anymore. It was family. It was forever.